Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Basil Reid 2014 results presentation. Following our trading update and the comments in the media over the past few days, I'm positively surprised to see so many of you at this presentation today. Our intention today is to cover three agenda items. First, Amanda and I will present the dreadful results of 2014 in much the same structure and order as the company was organized for most of last year. The second part of the presentation, we will introduce this rather good-looking executive team in front and several of our more supportive board members in the audience. But more importantly, I will describe what the new Basil Reid team has actually done about these dreadful results. We will then conclude with a brief presentation on our strategy going forward. Now, this presentation is very comprehensive, and in the unlikely event of there being any questions after this presentation, we'll happily keep you away from the wine and beer that will be served afterwards to field any of your questions. Now, before we move forward, at Basil Reid we've been working very hard on our corporate governance and transparency. So much of the presentation that you see today will be reviewed and soon to be audited fact. But to demonstrate that there is real hope for the company, we will present some forward-looking statements, and in particular on the expected performance of the coming year. Actually, we hope that we don't achieve these forward-looking predictions. We hope that we exceed them, and we believe that we can. But they are forward-looking, and they are dependent on future events. And we do undertake, to the best of our ability, to keep you informed on the progress towards the achievement of these targets. So the year under review. We started our presentation with the review of the financial and calendar year of 2014. There is a warning and a disclaimer on the following slide. It carries a PG rating and parental guidance is advised. The following slide may upset younger and more sensitive viewers. The huge losses that we forecasted in our trading statement at 821 million rand is significantly lower than the previous year. This is a complex number, and Amanda will unpack it soon in some detail. The turnover increased slightly, but the order book was down. This indicates a lower future turnover, as to be expected in the downturn of the sector's cycle. The headline earnings per share and the return on equity are down in line with the profit numbers. It is with regret that we report the death of two of our people during the year. While our financial results are a huge problem, our ultimate aim is to return everybody safely at the end of the shift. A great deal of work has been done to give health and safety the importance it deserves. We absolutely believe that zero harm is possible and achievable in our company and indeed in the industry. So unpacking our results, first we do a high-level operations review, and we will follow this with Amanda doing some detail on the financial numbers. Now, in this operations review, the operations review is in the order that we structured the company last year, namely a structure of a group of companies with subsidiaries. So we won't be speaking to each of the subsidiaries' performances, but these are covered under the broad headings on the slide. This will be the last time that we report in this form. Since last year, a new company structure is in place that we will describe in some detail. This consists of a company and divisions. This new structure has 2 operating wings in construction and mining, and 2 support units in business development and finance. So, back to the old structure and on to construction first of all. Within the construction sector, we have the TCTA project, which started out as a 1.35 billion rand project to build a 40-kilometer pipeline of 1.8 meters in diameter from the De Hoop Dam to Steelpoort. This project is almost complete, with the only remaining challenges being 2 river crossings, traversing a wetland, and starting the pump station. Our results include 320 million rands worth of loss for 2014. And this is on top of a 45 million rand loss recorded in 2013. Over 500 million rands worth of claims, largely for delays due to not having access to the land to build the pipeline, have been submitted and are being processed and discussed with the professional engineer. Now, despite the financial stress that this project has caused Basil Reed, the Basil Reed team has recovered from a poor start and has delivered a quality project. The Venetia civil project is substantially complete, but we have recorded a loss of 38 million rand in this project. The other work required to complete this project almost doubled from the initial scope of the project. And this has resulted in 68 million rands worth of claims that are being dealt with in terms of the contractual process. Now, these 2 big contracts, although we have accounted for large losses, there is hope of recovering much of these losses in the claims process. The roads business, however, incurred substantial losses at 165 million. These occurred in our roadcrete business and highlight the risk of operating a group of companies with almost independent subsidiaries. This type of loss has prompted us to change to a divisional structure. In our construction unit, we also have the major contracts with Eskom and at Kusile and at Medupi. There have been issues on agreeing what work has to be done, a slightly tedious claims process, and some significant accounting losses for the period. But we have, for a while now, been in positive discussion with Eskom to address these issues. This year we have progressed the resolution of claims to a point where we have actually started to receive payment. Now, if for no other reason than to spare the Sandton traffic the pain of load shedding, Eskom will remain one of our priority sites. In this review, there is some good news. Our development unit has developed an integrated housing model that is successfully demonstrated at Cosmos City. The Savannah City and Malebangwe Ridge projects follow this example. The integrated housing model differs from the typical South African development model in that it places subsidized and affordable to middle-class housing together in with community structures like schools and churches, with shopping centers and industrial parks into one integrated unit. In other words, a normal community without the need for public transport and highways. So, honestly, this is one of the first attempts to normalize living in South Africa and a move away from the perpetuation of an apartheid model that still stains the landscape. So while I accept being red-carded by the third umpire, and while I have been taken to task by the Sunday Times, it would have been nice to get some company recognition for the very positive press coverage that the Savannah City project this week in the newspapers. Now, back to some bad news. Our engineering services unit completely changed with the disposal of the TWP the disposal of TWP in 2013. There are 2 units that remain. Light architecture was stable, but growth is probably prohibited and hindered by being part of a construction company. It was decided last year to move to sale of this unit, and it has been sold post the year end. Our Matoma business presented a larger problem. Without work to do and with no order book, the company incurred huge losses last year. Matoma needed to be fixed, sold or closed, and at the rate of these losses, the action had to happen quickly. Our mining business presented positive results in a difficult year. The downturn in the metal prices and the labor issues in the mining sector last year contributed towards a difficult environment. While our production was good, the high cost of maintenance indicated that the capital injection was required. But there are some examples of, in our mining unit, the Majwe project, where our share of a joint venture in Botswana netted 54 million rand. Our Chudi copper mine project in Namibia, where we established site and are currently busy with a ramping up process. But on the downside, Discovery Metals in Botswana went into voluntary administration process with a write-off of 44 million pula in 2014, and we will probably have to write off a further 16 million pula this year. To end the operations review on a positive note, some important points on the St. Helena project. We are on track to meet the project deadlines with test flights this year and commercial flights in February next year. We do have a contract to run the airport for 10 years post the build. There's still some construction work that we are hopeful of doing on the island. With the airport and with the extra tourism, they need a hotel, and with all of this activity, a hospital would be really nice. Now, Jimmy will happily take visitors to the island. You can collect your tickets afterwards for the 6-week return trip on a container ship. You will, of course, have to work like a greenhorn in the world's deadliest catch, but visiting the project is really worth it. The St. Helena project does demonstrate the capacity of Basil Reed to execute major and technically difficult projects in remote locations with great success. Simply put, we don't have to go outside of Basil Reed to find examples of excellence. We have good examples on how to do things well within the company. All that we have to do is spread this excellence throughout Basil Reed. I am now going to share some of the pain of presenting these poor results with Amanda to cover the financial overview.
Thank you, Neville, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to spend too much time going through this particular slide. I think a lot of this information is contained in your booklets. You might have had some time to go through it before our presentation. Just to highlight a couple of things that are coming through. In terms of our EBITDA versus our EBIT number, it's very clear to see that we were significantly impacted by depreciation and amortization costs this year, the biggest of which relates to the impairment of goodwill. And then just in terms of our earnings per share and headline earnings per share, again, our biggest add back to that figure was that impairment of goodwill again. What I do want to spend a little bit of time on is just really unpacking the results as a whole and the key items that have really impacted on the poor results. Looking at our net loss after tax of 821 million, it is made up of quite a few once-off items that we're not expecting to recur in the future, but also there's some losses, as Neville has alluded to, that we are expecting to recover, if not all, then at least some of in the coming financial year. So just going through them very briefly, discontinued operations. In the prior year, that would have related to the disposal of TWP. We realized a profit of 183 million on that disposal. The other balance of 9 million relates to the reclassification of Light in the current financial year to being held for sale. The 79 million that relates to profit from or loss from discontinued operations of Light does include a goodwill impairment relating to that entity of 82 million. The balance of the goodwill being written off, 222 million, is really spread over our construction and our mining businesses, with the lion's share sitting in construction, specifically relating to our buildings division. Write-down of development land. This is not new. We've been in a situation where we've been writing this down for a number of years, and that is really due to the poor operational performance of our housing development in Mpumalanga, Rolling Hills. It's currently sitting in our books at about 120 million at the moment, and I think at that level it probably represents a truer picture of the value. Right-sizing costs we've incurred this year, 38 million. That's sort of across the board, mostly relating to actions taken at the head office level. And then just the operational losses coming through. TCTA, 320 million in the current financial year. Venetia, 38 million. Matomo, unfortunately, reporting a loss of 103 million for the financial year. Obviously, there's limited opportunity to recover any losses there. And then having to provide for a loss relating to the mining contract in Botswana for Discovery Metals. If you kind of unpack all of that, you can see that the core operations of Basil Reed are returning profits. Fundamentally, we are stable, unfortunately being impacted by some large ticket items this year. Just looking at our overhead costs, it's not specifically reported in the booklets, but will obviously come out when we release our integrated report. Our current year's overhead costs sitting at 586 million. As a percentage of revenue, that is significantly high, and in a market where margins are under pressure, it's clearly not sustainable. Just to look at it though, there are a couple of, again, once-off items that have impacted, or items that we have taken action that hopefully will not recur in future. Right-sizing costs, 38 million, that was necessary to do in the current financial year. Write-down of development land, and then the overhead costs coming through for Matomo as well. Adjusting for those entries, you can see that the overhead has reduced slightly from where it was in 2013. It does show that there is potential for greater improvement in this area though. Just looking very quickly at the group's balance sheet. Property, plant and equipment pretty stable. The non-current assets held for sale, again represented by Light, which was disposed early this year. The biggest portion of our non-current assets is made up of our investment in various associates and joint ventures, and then there's some deferred tax in there. And then just looking at our debt did increase slightly in the year under review. We raised 100 million through our domestic medium-term note program this year, which is disclosed as long-term, as the maturities are in 2016. We do have a bond maturing in June this year of 125 million, and that is obviously impacting on our short-term debt results. Net cash has decreased quite a bit since last year, but positive to say that we are still in a net cash position. And then just looking at our cash flow very briefly, operating loss, including Light, of 984 million. We've got some really big non-cash items coming through this year, including, again, the impairment of goodwill. There's depreciation in that number, as well as that write-down of Rolling Hills. Movements in working capital positive, but if you look at the balance sheet in detail, you'll see that our provisions number has increased significantly as we've provided for future losses on contracts. And that is really why there's been a positive working capital inflow. Not too much happening cash-wise. Otherwise, our net investing cash flows are really just due to the acquisition of additional plant and equipment. That's mostly in the mining division, as well as some additional plant for the St. Helena project. Mining, with establishing on site during the year at Shuri, obviously needed to put some plant items, and a large portion of their CapEx spend has been for that Namibian project. Again, cash flow from financing activities, we raised 100 million through our bond program, but we have been paying down our installment sale agreements throughout the year as well. Just in terms of cash, our liquidity is tight at the moment. It is manageable, and it is being managed effectively to make sure that our operations continue to run. there are lots of opportunities for us to stabilize this cash position this year. We are looking critically at some of our non-core assets, one of which we have disposed, which did realize a cash inflow of about 30 million. We're hopeful of resolving claims this year, which could yield significant cash inflows. And again, we've got that bond maturing in June, and we will be looking to either roll it over with our current investor or replace it with a new bond. And then just to demonstrate the order book, and this has really been presented in our new operational format, so we can see where it's coming. It has reduced, as Neville said earlier. I don't think that is completely unexpected in a construction sector that has struggled somewhat this year. But just to demonstrate that we do have quite a solid order book considering our forecasts of future turnover. And that really concludes the financial review. I'll hand back to Neville to hopefully give us some good news stories.
Thank you, Amanda. Now, the board and management of Basil Reed recognized that the company was heading for these dreadful results, and it was clear that real action had to be taken. So in this part of the presentation, we want to describe the action that has been taken, and the outcome of that action. This is real action, as I will show you. It wasn't to form a committee and study the problem and look at some future program. Firstly, and quite early on in this process, the executive committee and the board was refreshed. So on stage over here, we have my extraordinarily good-looking ExCo team. You've already met Amanda Whiteman, our CFO, who was appointed in October last year. She's been with Basil Reed for 8 years already. Jimmy Johnson, next to her, is our Executive Officer Mining, Executive Officer Construction, and he has about 100 years of Basil Reed experience. Ketuchelo Mapasa is next to him, and he is the Executive Officer Mining. He's a recent recruit from De Beers. We have Olivier Gio, who is the Executive Officer for Business Development, who's been with us for 12 years now and forms our French connection with Bouygues. And finally, we have Andiswa Ndoni, the Executive Officer for Corporate Services and Legal, a relatively new member to the team with only 2 years of Basil Reed experience. In the audience here, we have our recently appointed chairman, Mr. Paul Baloy. We have the chairman of the audit committee, Doris Dondu, and we have Des Hughes, the recent appointment to the board, following his significant contribution as acting CEO. Lastly, we have Dr. Claudia Manning, and I mention her last because she's the chairman of the remuneration committee, who unfortunately decided to award me a 0 increase for this year. So, moving on to our turnaround. These problems were identified early on and we took action. We addressed 2 areas. First, in terms of the overhead. The size of the overhead was out of proportion to the turnover of the company, and this overhead was particularly inefficient and probably disruptive to our operations. More importantly, the group structure and subsidiaries that was operated, the subsidiaries operated independently and often got into trouble. It's actually quite hard to see the operating structures in this complicated set of company structures. The company structures of these subsidiaries remain in the overhead, and all of these subsidiaries retained their management information systems, their company structures, their boards of directors, and so on. And this all resulted in 0 synergy with the group of companies. Because this overhead was so large and complicated, I think we'd forgotten the importance of actually running our operating units. Our delivery was in many, but not in all cases, poor when measured to our historic high standard. we seemed to not have the ability to turn around loss-making contracts. And very importantly, we didn't have clear operating lines, nor did we have clear direct accountability. We had too many directors and MDs and chairmen and no managers. And this bloated ExCo tried to run the company at the executive and the operations level. To address this overhead issue, an operations-based model was introduced where the group and subsidiary model was replaced with a company and division model. The executive was streamlined and appropriately staffed to run the company and make the strategic decisions. An operating committee or OPSCO was introduced to delegate oversight and decisions to the appropriate level of management and to oversee the operating units of the company. At a company level, the organization was divided into 4 pillars, namely the construction, mining, business development, and the financial and corporate services. The operations were divided into divisions that represent the areas in which we plan to operate, namely the buildings and development, civil and plant, mining, pipelines, roads, and the St. Helena project. The subsidiaries were reviewed. The subsidiaries that existed before were reviewed and decisions were made. Where the subsidiary was part of the work that we wanted to do, it was incorporated into the division structure. The aim here is to operate under one Basil Reed banner without the complicated multiple branding subsidiaries that we had before. Clearly, where appropriate, we will not lose these company structures, but they will operate in the background to the operating model. Now, where subsidiaries did not fit this model, they were sold, fixed, or closed. Our turnaround had 2 aims. It was first to fix the overhead and operating model, and secondly, it was to cut costs. So how did we do in this regard? We cut the money spent on overhead from 586 million to a budget of 280 million rand for this year. The 280 million rand includes some carryover costs that have been addressed this year and should be out by the end of the year. Importantly, we cut from 9% turnover to 5% turnover, which means that we have moved from the highest relative overhead spend to almost the lowest relative spend for construction companies. We reduced the staff complement from 583 to 250. We closed satellite offices and we reduced the running cost of the Boksburg campus. The cost of this exercise was a modest 38 million rand. Points worth mentioning in the consolidation of the subsidiaries: the integration of Roadcrete with our roads division. Post the year end, Light was sold in a management buyout for 42 million rand. But despite our best efforts, Matomo has not been integrated, sold or fixed, and so we are in the process of an orderly closure. Basil Reed Energy is earmarked for disposal. Now, the bulk of the work in the turnaround was completed by the end of last year, by the end of the year under review. We believe that the actions that have been taken have set us up for this year. I think you will agree with me that when I say that the numbers involved in the turnaround are large, and the Basil Reed team has achieved amazing results in a short period of time. The turnaround was only possible and will be sustainable only because of ownership of the implementation of the plan was accepted by all of the Basil Reed staff, and a big vote of thanks is due to my team. Earlier this year, the ExCo team prepared a strategy which was accepted by the board. The vision in the strategy is to be the leading construction company in Southern Africa, where we are the preferred contractor, the preferred employer, and the preferred investment. Our value centers will be buildings and development, civil and plant, mining, pipelines, roads, and the St. Helena project. We have 3 strategic thrusts in our strategy. The first is to grow the company. First by securing the annual turnover, and then by increasing this annual turnover. Initially, the growth will be organic. Acquisitions may follow, but this would be at a later date. There's huge opportunity in organic growth in our business. Our second strategic thrust is to sweat the assets. In a marginal business, which construction is, any improvement in the delivery of projects and services translates directly to the bottom line. So all aspects of human resource management, capital management, and asset optimization, productivity improvement will contribute towards us being able to sweat our assets. The third strategic thrust is to modernize our corporate culture. In order to survive for the next 7 decades, there is a need to transform and modernize our corporate culture. This starts with a value-based behavior and includes gender and race transformation. And so you will be glad to hear that we are getting to the end of our presentation. We had a terrible year last year. We took decisive, comprehensive, and significant action last year to address this. Going forward, we are working to achieve our vision of being the best. What you can expect this year is a lower turnaround, but a profit. We intend to take the brackets off of the computers in our finance department. We have started the year in line with this budget that we have prepared. Our order book has had a few significant additions since the start of the year and is currently over 11 billion rand. We have kicked off a couple of significant projects, and we are making sure of a good start to avoid the escalation of claims by addressing these issues early on. Of course, in the short term, we have issues that attract our attention, but I am confident that we will resolve these issues successfully and that Basil Reed is set up to become the great company that it once was. A word of thanks to Amanda and her finance team, to all the teams that made money, to all the teams that worked hard to fix our contracts and to fix the company, to our clients for bearing with us, to our investors for staying with us, and to you for listening. Thank you. Jenny will come up and field questions.
Good afternoon. We'll be taking questions from the floor first, then from the conference call, and then from the webcast. Any questions?
Thank you. I have quite a few questions. Stop me whenever you wish. Regarding the Rolling Hills write-down, in itself, the 80 million write-down does not improve the attractiveness of people interested in buying. So what is the plan to dispose of the properties?
The Rolling Hills project is in the Belfast area. The reality is that in the area, these types of properties have battled to meet the growth targets that have been expected. We are working in this area to try and market it and improve the situation, and the write-down of goodwill is representative of the market circumstances that are prevalent in that area.
Does that suggest, if I might take that point further, that you intend reducing the prices of the properties? You know, there is a project there, and you know, we would look at any opportunities to develop it in the future. Okay. May I carry on?
You may.
I now wish to talk about goodwill, please. In the overview on page 8, it states that the results were impacted by the impairment of goodwill, and the amount of 304.4 million is mentioned. However, on page 1 in the income statement, the impairment of goodwill is shown as 222 million. How is the difference made good?
The balance of 82 million relates specifically to the disposal of light, which is classified as a it's classified as a discontinued operation. It comes to that line in the income statement. So on page 1,
Yes.
there's a line item, net loss profit for the year from discontinued operations, showing a loss of 79 million. The further right, the balance of 82 million goodwill is included in that number.
Right, thank you. Right. On page 3, on the balance sheet, there's a line item, deferred income tax asset, which shows an increase from the year before of 180 million. Could you explain that, please?
Again, that just relates to the poor performance of the results, in that we've recorded significant losses. We've had to provide deferred tax against these losses. We spent quite a lot of time working with our audit team on the recoverability of these losses, and decided that in terms of our forecasts, we're comfortable that it can remain on our balance sheet.
On page 25, which was one of your slides, there is a line item, resolution of claims. What are the claims that you are referring to?
In the contracts that we demonstrated here, there are various claims regarding the contract work. When we started off the contract, there was a certain price, and changes that occur during the implementation of that contract result in claims, variation orders, and compensation events. And so the claims that we are referring to there are those types of events.
Thanks, Mr. Nicolau. In the worst case, please, what would a further write-down entail if all the resolutions were in favour of the clients?
Well, we have written down the losses in these accounts as we see them, and if we did not get any money back from any of the claims, then the accounts would stand as they are. We have not recorded or accounted for the claims anywhere in our accounts.
And then finally, again from the balance sheet, the current portion of borrowing is 273 million. Now, by definition, current borrowing means that you intend paying back in this financial year. I fail to see how that can be possible. Could you comment on that, please?
The majority of that number would represent installment sale agreements for the acquisition of property, plant and equipment, which is a normal part of our trading environment, and will be paid down as those amounts fall due. There is 100 million included in that figure for the domestic medium-term note program, which matures in June. We are looking to roll it over or replace it with another bond, but at this point we haven't started those negotiations with the bondholder. So it's prudent to put it into current.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay, can we take question? Oh, sorry, David.
I'm David Fraser from Peregrine Capital. Neville, obviously you've tried to take a deep bath there, but I guess in the same vein, we still talk about ongoing losses in Matoma and closure costs and another 16 million pool. I mean, if you are going to take a deep bath, why were those costs not fully provided for here? I mean, I just find it, I look at your forecast and I'd like to believe it, but yet, there still seems to be some legacy issues that you haven't fully addressed and fully provided for in these accounts, and yet, we'll have some sort of a carry forward into the next year. And while we'd all like to believe it looks certainly that there's a few lingering issues that are going to creep into this year. I mean, your comment on that.
Well, David, I mean, I don't think that it's fair to say that we've kind of tried to take a bath and destroy, the results for this year. I mean, these results are presented in accounting terms and with accounting rules, and so we apply the accounting rules and we report them as we see it appropriate. The 16 million pooler loss is this year's event. In other words, it would not have been appropriate to include it in last year. The Matoma losses are also this year's event. I think what's important is that if you look at Matoma, we showed in the presentation a 78 million rand loss last year for the company. We took quite quick action this year to reduce that to the closure cost of the company early on. But it would not have been appropriate to account for that in last year's results. So, we work within the rules of accounting. Even the goodwill number, it's set quite objectively. And so I appreciate that there is some judgment in these numbers, but that discretion is quite limited and certainly wouldn't change the magnitude or the quantum of the number.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. One more.
Give me, I have another one. This is in connection with the Competition Commission. Again, the income statement says that this is an operating loss before provision. Again, worst case scenario. What would that entail?
That entry relates to the 2013 financial year, and it relates to the previous fine that was imposed by the Competition Commission. We have paid half of that fine already. There's no further costs coming through from the Competition Commission at this stage. What do you want to add?
Are you not obliged in terms of IFRS to have written it down already in this year, given that it is something that eventually has to be written down or provided for?
The full cost was taken in 2013.
The full amount was?
The full cost was taken in previous financial
years.
years.
Why is it mentioned here a provision for Competition Commission?
It was the...
What provision are you referring to then, if it's already been provided?
In 2013, we were imposed with a fine by the Competition
Yes.
Commission. We had not fully provided for it at that stage. That is the balance of the fine that we provided for. The liability to the Commission, which we still have half to pay, is still included in our balance sheet. There's no further impact on the income statement.
Thank you.
Okay, can we take questions from the conference call?
At this stage, there are no questions in the queue on the conference call.
Good. Okay. No questions from the webcast? Thank you very much for your time.